picked it up by chance much to the woman's disappointment. As she holds the book she finally understands Saint Sama's plan. And with a cold look she identifies Mana's plot as a fraud. In another location someone asks Dale-sama to repeat what he just said. He is sitting at the head of a long table with a group of men and tells Surina that he admires the courage she has shown. One of the men embraces Surina, telling her she is truly brave, and praises her for facing Lunaria head-on and getting the better of her time and time again. He then declares that it's not enough for just the Academy to know of her deeds. They will show Lunaria's true character on the grand stage it deserves. In a tense throne room, the king furiously declares he will banish Lunaria Alvonsalfege from the royal capital as she stares back with cold defiance. This triggers a memory of a grand ball where her former fiancé, the prince, publicly announces her downfall is a consequence of her arrogance while he walks away with another woman before a crowd of judging eyes. The shock of his words rings in her ears as she remembers him calling out her name, Lunaria. Her mind flashes back further to a lonely childhood where her mother berated her for tripping, calling her a crybaby and an ill-mannered child who only pretends to be talented. She remembers her entire family, mother, father, and sister, looking down on her with contempt as her mother raised a hand to punish her yet again. Even the servants tormented her, accidentally splashing a bucket of freezing water on her in a cold hallway and laughing behind their hands. They mocked her with false concern, sarcastically commenting on how refreshing cold water must feel in the dead of winter, Lady Lunaria. The constant taunts and condescending names echoed in her mind as she internally screamed, wondering what was wrong with everyone around her. Back in the ballroom, the other woman, Mana Primera, condescendingly calls her a sad person with no compassion, wholeheartedly agreeing with the prince's judgment. Mana, glowing with a righteous light, points at her and demands that Lunaria reflect on her wicked actions. Then, before the entire assembly, Mana publicly declares that Lunaria Alvonsalfege is a villainess, sealing her fate in this story. This entire scene is from an Otome game, where Lunaria is cast as the hated antagonist, a thorny beauty with a piercing gaze. A modern woman, walking home late at night, reflects on the game, finding it strange that Lunaria alone suffers such harsh treatment simply because her thorns make others uncomfortable. The woman clenches her fist with determination, thinking that if she were by Lunaria's side, she would support her with everything she had. She wishes deeply that she could somehow be close to Lunaria. Suddenly, her eyes snap open with a jolt. She finds herself groaning on a cold, ornate floor, completely disoriented. As she sits up, she mutters about falling asleep on the floor again but then pauses, realizing something is terribly wrong with her surroundings. She looks around a magnificent, unfamiliar bedroom, filled with luxurious furniture and a grand four-poster bed, and desperately wonders where she is. Trying to make sense of it all, she recalls her last memories of working overtime and taking the train home as usual. A wave of shock and confusion washes over her face. She touches her own face in disbelief, thinking this can't possibly be real, yet the feeling is undeniable. She stumbles towards a vanity mirror, her heart pounding as she questions the figure she sees reflected in it. The mirror reveals a stunning young woman with long, shining hair, captivating sapphire blue eyes, and a supple, toned body. She slowly realizes that this body isn't hers. Looking closer, she sees the unmistakable face of Lunaria Alvonsalfege staring back at her in horrified recognition. Her mind races, recalling Lunaria's profile from the game, Angel's Protection is with you, a powerful magician from the esteemed Salfege family, one of the 4 great duchies. Lunaria Alvonsalfege, a name now tied to her own existence. She touches her new face, a blush spreading across her cheeks as she admits to herself that Lunaria has always been her absolute favorite character. Overjoyed, she pinches her cheek to confirm this isn't a dream, marveling at how Lunaria is just as beautiful as she had always imagined. Once the reality sinks in that she's not dreaming, she throws her hands up in frustration, demanding to know what is going on. She rushes to the window and is greeted by the breathtaking sight of a sprawling estate and a magnificent garden of blooming roses. She instantly recognizes the scene from the game. The scarlet crimson roses confirm she is truly within the Salfege family's estate. Looking out, she identifies the main building in the distance and realizes she is in the annex, the very place Lunaria was forced to live in isolation. The room's interior perfectly matches the detailed descriptions from the limited edition game booklet, confirming this is Lunaria's bedroom. For a moment, she gets sidetracked by her own nerdy knowledge, trying to recall if the booklet was a special pre-order bonus. But she quickly shakes her head, snapping back to reality and yelling at herself that the real problem is why she has woken up as Lunaria. She desperately tries to remember what happened the night before, recalling getting off the train and stopping at a convenience store. She feels like she's about to remember something crucial that happened right after that. A painful memory flashes through her mind. She sees a memory of an ornate dagger and realizes with a start that these memories aren't her own. They are Lunaria's memories, flooding into her consciousness. She sees through Lunaria's eyes as she held that same dagger, whispering that she was tired of it all and asking her deceased mother for forgiveness. She feels the chilling phantom sensation of a blade digging into her throat and understands with horror that Lunaria had tried to take her own life. But as she processes this, she thinks that given the constant abuse Lunaria endured, her actions were tragically understandable. She wonders if Lunaria actually committed suicide, but then her extensive knowledge of the game kicks in, and she recalls that such a scenario never existed in any of the game's routes. She knows this for a fact because she had obsessively played through every single path to uncover all of Lunaria's hidden backstory, concluding that it was no surprise Lunaria had lost the will to live. The game's narrative explained that after her mother's death, Lunaria was subjected to severe abuse within her own home. The new stepmother and the servants she brought with her were especially cruel, making Lunaria's life a living hell. Her story was a twisted version of Cinderella, surrounded by enemies with no fairy godmother to save her. Her primary tormentors were the game's main love interests, the Crown Prince and his entourage, as well as the story's protagonist. To protect herself from them all, Lunaria had no choice but to hone her magic until it was unrivaled and overwhelmingly powerful. Despite achieving outstanding results at school through her sheer effort, she was still met with envy and mistreatment from everyone around her. As the designated villainess, the game was rigged against her, with every single route leading to a tragic end, either banishment or death. Her fate was as pitiful as a crushed rose, destined for suffering no matter what choices were made. Looking in the mirror, she wonders if the game's creators had a personal vendetta against strong, seemingly cold characters like Lunaria. She personally always preferred a thorny but strong-willed character like Lunaria over the sweet and universally adored protagonist. She then sees a faint image of the real Lunaria collapsing right where she now stands. Her eyes fall upon a small, ornate dagger lying on the floor, realizing it must have fallen from Lunaria's hand when she collapsed. A wave of sorrow washes over her as she comprehends the sheer desperation that must have driven her favorite character to this point. She instinctively touches her neck, searching for the wound from the dagger. There's nothing. Not a single scratch, which confuses her because she distinctly felt the sensation of the blade piercing her skin. A bead of nervous sweat trickles down her face as she looks around the room. Her gaze lands on a chair, where she sees a ghostly apparition of Lunaria sitting forlornly. The spirit of Lunaria whispers into the empty room, lamenting that she can't even die of her own free will. The ghostly figure looks down, consumed by despair. The new Lunaria calls out her name, her voice trembling. The spirit turns slightly, murmuring that she's had enough of this life. She realizes with a start that the Lunaria she's admired for so long is truly right there behind her, not just a figment of her imagination. Lunaria's spirit says it's time for her to go, and the girl fears that if she turns, the vision will disappear forever. "Wait, Lunaria," she cries out, pleading with her to stay just a moment longer. She begs the spirit not to go, her voice cracking as she confesses how long she has wanted to meet her. The spirit wistfully wonders if she managed to fulfill her role properly in the end. Overcome with emotion, the girl clutches her chest. With tears streaming down her face, she cries out that Lunaria did more than enough. Hearing this, Lunaria's spirit offers a faint, gentle smile of relief. And then she begins to fade into particles of light. The girl watches in tearful desperation as her idol disappears before her very eyes. She lunges forward, shouting Lunaria's name one last time, trying to grasp at the fading light. She is left alone in the silent room, her face etched with grief and disbelief. She lets out a choked sob. Then she clutches her head, trying to process the overwhelming encounter. Taking a shaky breath, she whispers to herself and to the memory of the girl she now embodies, "It's all right now, Lunaria." Wiping the tears from her eyes, she steels her expression and vows to do her best from this moment on. She takes a deep, steadying breath, her resolve hardening. She stands tall, her grief replaced by a newfound purpose. "Let's look over the situation," she says to herself, her voice now firm and clear. She strides across the room and throws open the large window with a resounding bang. With a fiercely determined gaze, she looks out at the world she has been thrown into, ready to change her favorite character's tragic fate. As she surveys the estate, she notes that the main building is completely unharmed. This is strange because according to the game's backstory, the building should have been partially destroyed by Lunaria's magical outburst before the story even began, a result of the constant abuse she suffered from her family. This crucial detail means she has arrived in this world before the game's plot officially starts, right at the very beginning of a new timeline. She reflects on how the magical outburst was just a plot device to establish Lunaria as a formidable villainess, with the cause only briefly mentioned as her harsh family environment. But for now, there are no signs that such an event has occurred yet, giving her a clean slate. She is certain this is the world of the game, Tenkago. But two key things are different from the original story. First, Lunaria's body somehow survived the suicide attempt without a scratch, and second, her own soul has taken over Lunaria's, for reasons she can't possibly comprehend. With these two facts established, her path forward becomes crystal clear. She realizes the original Lunaria tried to force an early exit from her tragic fate, leaving her to take the stage in her place. The sound of approaching footsteps echoes down the hall. A maid bursts into the room with a scowl, demanding to know what all the noise is about. Lunaria instantly recognizes her as one of the servants who relentlessly tormented the original Lunaria. The maid saunters in with a mocking smirk, commenting on how funny it was to hear her yelling and sarcastically asking who on earth she was talking to. She then peeks under the bed with a sneer, accusingly asking if Lunaria had secretly brought a man into her room. Finding nothing, she dismisses the idea with a disappointed sigh. Lunaria silently fumes, thinking the maid has absolutely no shred of decency. The maid then cruelly calls her creepy for talking to herself in an empty room. She leans in close, her voice dripping with venom as she whispers that she heard the late Duchess was insane, so the daughter must be a crazy woman too. What a pity. Lunaria's heart aches, realizing the original Lunaria must have endured such vile words every single day until her spirit was finally broken. The maid then spots a beautiful necklace, snatches it away, and declares she'll hold on to it, accusing Lunaria of stealing it from her father's belongings and calling her a shameless little girl. A fierce, determined glint appears in Lunaria's eyes as she knows exactly what she has to do. She silently vows to turn this cruel and ridiculous fate completely upside down for the sake of the girl she now embodies. A wave of icy magic erupts from her, causing the maid to shriek in shock as the temperature plummets. Lunaria coldly declares that she will make every single person who pushed her into a corner realize the gravity of their actions. The maid cries out in terror as the ice rapidly creeps up her body. Lunaria stands tall and powerful as jagged pillars of ice erupt from the floor all around her. With a swift, decisive gesture, she finishes her thought, proclaiming that they will all learn that this is her domain now as the maid lets out one final shriek. The maid is instantly encased in a thick prison of solid ice, her terrified expression frozen in time. Lunaria stands over her, the magical energy swirling around her as ice covers the room. Her expression is cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the despair of her predecessor. She calmly informs the frozen maid not to worry, as she's left a small air hole, and since it's a warm day, she's sure to thaw out eventually. She takes a step forward, the ice on the floor cracking under her heel. With a wicked little smile, she leans toward the ice statue and sarcastically asks, "Isn't it nice and cold?" Just as the servants once mocked her. Having dealt with her first tormentor, she turns her attention to her next objective. Suddenly, a loud ding rings through the air, catching her off guard. She looks around, surprised by the sudden sound. Her eyes widen as she wonders what this new sound could be. A translucent window, exactly like one from a video game, materializes before her, presenting a choice regarding the magic bell that proves the heir of the Solfege family. Ring it, or don't ring it. The scene cuts to a massive, ornate bell glowing with immense magical power. Elsewhere in the mansion, servants hear the resounding toll and wonder what the sound could possibly be. A stern-looking butler recognizes the noble tone instantly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He and another servant rush through the halls, calling for the stepmother with urgency. In another room, Lunaria's stepsister Nevia clutches her ears in annoyance, complaining about the nerve-wracking sound. Her mother, the stepmother Rufemia, looks on with cold disdain, remarking that it seems the dog is trying to bite its owner's hands. She stares into the distance with a calculating gaze, wondering what Lunaria could possibly be plotting. Nevia is aghast, her face a mask of fury as she stammers, "How dare that?" Rufemia's expression darkens as she mutters with contempt, "That little girl." Back in her room, Lunaria stares in shock at the floating option window before her. She recognizes the ornate design as being identical to the user interface from the game, Tenkago. This solidifies her realization that she truly has been transported into the game world she loved. The choices flicker before her, patiently waiting for her to make a decision. She finds this development incredibly strange, as Lunaria was the villainess, not a playable character, and therefore never had choices like this in the original game. The choice is clear: Ringing the bell means claiming her position as the head of the family and starting a direct confrontation with her father and stepmother, while not ringing it is the passive path the original Lunaria would have taken. She remembers how the original Lunaria desperately tried to believe in her twisted fate, hoping her family would one day repent and become respectable people. With a heavy heart and a hardened gaze, she concludes that they were never worth Lunaria's hope. She stands before the glowing options, her long hair flowing as if moved by an unseen wind. Without a shred of hesitation, she reaches out and firmly presses the Ring It option. She braces herself, wondering what is supposed to happen now that she's defied the original story. An immense surge of magical power erupts from her body, flowing outwards. A massive, shimmering ring of light bursts from the top of the main estate, signaling the bell's toll to the entire world. She understands now that her magic was used to activate the legendary bell. From this point forward, she will be venturing into the unknown, a world beyond the game's predetermined routes, and she can't help but wish for a save and load feature. Her thoughts are interrupted by a loud, insistent banging on her bedroom door. A polite but firm voice from the other side says, "Please excuse me." Recognizing the voice, she grants him permission to enter, her expression unreadable. The door opens to reveal a man in a butler's uniform and glasses peeking inside. He rushes into the room, his eyes wide with alarm as he calls out her name, Lady Lunaria. Her own eyes widen in surprise at his sudden appearance. The butler, Kyle, freezes in his tracks, staring in utter shock at the maid frozen in a block of ice and asking just what happened here. Lunaria calmly turns to him, remarking that it's rare to see him so surprised, and addresses him by his name, Kyle. She nonchalantly gestures to the frozen maid, explaining it away as an ice sculpture of an impudent servant. Her mind flashes to the game's lore, recalling that Kyle, while serving the new Duchess, was secretly still loyal to Lunaria's deceased mother. He is Kyle, the head butler, a man who has served the Solfege family for over 30 years and a hidden ally. She knows that her stepmother's new servants are her enemies, but she holds out hope for the loyalty of the original staff. Kyle looks at her with a serious expression and asks if she just heard the sound of a bell. He presses further, his gaze intense, asking if she truly understands what that sound signifies. Standing with her arms crossed, she confidently admits that she was the one who rang the magic bell, the undeniable proof of her status as the Solfege heir. Kyle's expression grows even more grave as he warns her that declaring herself the head of the family is the same as declaring all-out war on her father and his new family. She meets his gaze without flinching and replies with absolute certainty, "Yes, of course I do." She challenges him further, asking with a defiant glare if there's a problem with that. Kyle's stern facade finally breaks as he realizes that the time has finally come. He clutches his chest, his voice thick with emotion as he confesses that he has been eagerly waiting for this very moment to arrive. In a stunning display of loyalty, he bows deeply before her, addressing her not as, "my lady," but with the proper title she has just claimed, "Your Grace, the Duchess of Solfege." Lunaria listens silently, her expression unchanged but her mind racing. Kyle then assures her that she wasn't alone in her suffering and that other allies within the mansion have been waiting for her to rise up. She turns towards the window, her back to him, and quietly apologizes for keeping him waiting for so long. Kyle begins to explain that he had always tried to believe that her father would eventually come to his senses and protect his own daughter from her cruel stepmother and stepsister. But she cuts him off, her voice laced with icy rage, as she declares that she has finally realized what this rotten house truly needs is a thorough cleaning of its garbage. She looks back at him over her shoulder, a quiet understanding passing between them as she says, "So you've always been on my side, Kyle." She calmly tells Kyle she understands he couldn't act sooner since his position required him to serve her father. Kyle reveals it was her late mother's dying wish that no one help Lunaria until she was ready to stand up for herself. He confesses with a heavy heart that he wanted to abandon his position countless times just to save her from her suffering. Lunaria offers a knowing smile, understanding now that her mother had placed immense trust in him. Kyle's expression hardens as he confirms there is no need for her to doubt his loyalty any longer. She then asks if any other servants are willing to follow her and instructs him to bring them here immediately. To her surprise, the sound of many footsteps claps down the hallway. The door bursts open to reveal Kyle leading a large assembly of butlers and maids who have already gathered in anticipation of her command. Lunaria is visibly stunned and moved by the sheer number of allies she unknowingly possessed. The servants all rally behind her, addressing her as Duchess and vowing to fight by her side and do everything they can to help. With a powerful magic she has honed and a newfound army at her back, she confidently declares that they are ready for what's to come. She reflects on her complete preparations, now armed with loyal people and the extensive knowledge she gained from playing Tenkago over and over. With a wicked grin and a swirling orb of magic forming in her palm, she announces it's time to dispose of the worthless trash that has infested her home. She slams the door behind her, ready to lead the charge. She leads her new allies to a more suitable guest room in the annex, remarking that her bedroom is no place for a strategy meeting. Inside the room, which perfectly matches the game's reference materials, she gazes at a large, elegant portrait of the late Duchess, her biological mother. Suddenly, a maid rushes in to warn her that their enemies have arrived. A group led by her stepmother and stepsister marches menacingly down the corridor towards them. The stepmother Rufemia leads the pack, her expression cold and severe as she wields a riding crop. A loyal maid urgently tells Lunaria that they are coming this way. Lunaria remarks that they arrived faster than she expected and quickly conjures a swirling magical shield, noting that even villains have some form of organization. Rufemia and Nevia stop in their tracks, looking up at the annex now encased in a glowing hexagonal barrier. Her allies stare in wonder at the sudden shield, and she calmly explains that she put up a magic barrier. She adds that it won't last long against them but will buy her the time she needs. Kyle is completely astonished, questioning how she could have erected a barrier around the entire building in a mere instant. He looks at her with newfound respect, admitting he had no idea she had become so proficient with her magic. Lunaria quickly changes the subject, stating there's something important she must do before they are interrupted and asks Kyle for the location of the magic stone. Kyle confirms that he knows where it is. He presents her with an ornate box, opening it to reveal a glowing, inscribed stone as he declares, "It's right here." Taking the stone, she smirks, impressed that he was so thoroughly prepared for this moment. She gives him a swift order to summon the crow immediately, which he acknowledges without hesitation. Holding the magic stone, she announces that she will now open the gate. The stone shines with a brilliant light as Kyle thinks to himself that the king must be informed of the birth of the new Duchess of Sulfish. She presses the stone against the wall, and a massive, intricate magic circle materializes out of thin air. The circle expands into a swirling portal of light. The portal stabilizes, revealing a clear view of the royal castle on the other side, and she confirms that the gate is now open. Her loyal servants gasp in awe, finally seeing the legendary gate they had only heard stories about. Meanwhile, Kyle performs a separate ritual, opening an ancient tome and chanting for his familiar to appear. The pages of the book flip rapidly as magic gathers. A small, winged creature with the body of a rabbit and roses for eyes emerges from the glowing pages. Kyle quickly scribbles a message on a piece of parchment. The familiar takes the note in its mouth and speeds away on its mission. Kyle sends his familiar off to the king with the urgent news. The new Duchess of the Sulfish family, one of the 4 great duchies, has been born. Lunaria turns to her assembled allies, giving them one final chance to back out now that she is officially opposing her father and stepmother. Kyle simply smiles and asks what her next command is. She explains that while she should normally go to the castle immediately to pay her respects, there's something else she must do first. Outside, Rufemia furiously orders her men to break through the barrier, dismissing it as the work of a mere little girl. One of her brutish guards scoffs and cracks his knuckles. He tosses his weapon aside and pushes against the magical shield with all his strength. With a final, mighty punch, the barrier shatters into pieces with a loud bang. A maid warns Lunaria that the barrier has been broken and their enemies are on their way, but Lunaria simply smirks, saying it's time for the first major cleaning in a long time and asks if everyone is ready for a fight. Kyle and the loyal servants stand resolute, declaring that they will ensure everything shines without leaving a single speck of dust behind. Lunaria's smile widens, eager for the impending confrontation. The door to the room begins to rumble as it's forced open from the outside. Her stepsister Nevia peeks in, mockingly asking what they were doing sneaking around. Rufemia follows, striding in with her entourage and condescendingly offering Lunaria a chance to speak her last words. Lunaria stands her ground and sincerely thanks them for coming. With a terrifyingly sweet smile, she adds that she is absolutely ecstatic they all came to congratulate her on becoming the new Duchess of Sulfish. She addresses her stepmother Rufemia, her lovely sister Nevia, and all their underlings, sarcastically correcting herself to say loyal servants. Rufemia and Nevia are frozen in absolute shock, their faces twisted in disbelief as they stammer, "Just who's the Duchess now?" Lunaria repeats her earlier defiant words with a cold stare, asking if there is a problem with her claim. Her sinister smile returns as she declares once more that it's time to dispose of the worthless trash. Her expression is one of pure, unadulterated contempt. She stands before them, a figure of newfound power and authority. Her smile is wide and unnerving, a promise of the pain she is about to inflict. A flashback begins, showing Rufemia telling a younger, terrified Lunaria that she needs to be punished. Rufemia then viciously slaps the child across a long hallway. The young Lunaria groans in pain as she collapses onto the cold floor. Rufemia and Nevia look down on her with utter disdain, a common occurrence in her childhood. The scene shows the constant cycle of abuse she was forced to endure. But despite it all, a small part of her still clung to the hope that her family would one day return to normal. She tearfully asked them why they treated her so cruelly. Nevia feigned innocence, mockingly asking what she meant and acting as if they had done nothing wrong. Rufemia sneered that as the pampered daughter of the late Duchess, she had grown into an arrogant child. She cruelly reminded Lunaria that her mother was dead and now she was nothing but a poor, pathetic little girl. Rufemia then grabbed her by the chin, ordering the little brat to learn her place in the new hierarchy. The chapter ends, titled, "Magic is the best torture device." Back in the present, Rufemia scoffs, asking if Lunaria didn't hear her earlier insults. Lunaria calmly repeats her declaration, stating that she is now the official head of the Solfege family, and might she add, the new head. Rufemia and Nevia can only stare back at the composed girl and her wall of loyal servants. Rufemia lets out a small, disbelieving laugh. Then her face contorts in rage as she calls Lunaria's declaration such utter bullshit. Lunaria's eyes widen ever so slightly at the raw vulgarity. With a venomous smile, Rufemia calls her a conceited, incompetent little girl. She insists that Lunaria must be kidding, because there is absolutely no way she could ever be the head of the family. Rufemia continues to rant, unable to accept the sudden shift in power. Lunaria cuts her off with a cool, dismissive tone. "You say the strangest things, stepmother." Rufemia's lip twitches in fury at the blatant disrespect. Nevia immediately jumps to her mother's defense, shouting that she can't talk to her mother like that when she is always keeping Lunaria in her thoughts. Nevia reacts with shock, calling her sister's words terrible. Rufemia puts on a fake, gentle smile and tells Lunaria not to misunderstand, claiming that everything she does is for Lunaria's own sake. Lunaria coolly replies that she was not aware of any such kindness. She then lists all the cruelty she has endured, being drenched in freezing water, tripped on purpose, and having her clothes destroyed, and sarcastically asks if all of that was also for her benefit. Rufemia feigns innocence, calling the accusation terrible and claiming she would never harm her too precious family. Lunaria presses on, pointing out that the servants who tormented her were all brought here by Rufemia and are clearly on her side. Rufemia continues to play dumb, suggesting the servants might have acted on their own while doubting such things ever even happened. She then mockingly wonders if being paranoid is a family trait and claims that being falsely accused is unbearable. Nevia chimes in, agreeing that it must be just another one of her sister's baseless assumptions. Rufemia dismisses Lunaria's claims, saying she's just a desperate girl making things up and that's the real reason she rang the bell and rallied the servants against them. Nevia, confused by the loyal servants standing behind Lunaria, asks what they're doing and remarks that they look like her sister's royal guard. Rufemia addresses the loyal staff with disgust, calling them ungrateful for daring to stand up to their employer. One of the loyal butlers retorts that their true master is Lady Lunaria, but Rufemia cuts him off, furious that a mere servant dares to speak. She warns him that Lunaria isn't the only one who needs to be punished for her insolence. She then orders her guards to toss the insolent servant out, telling them to be polite about it. One of the brutish guards cracks his knuckles and grabs the loyal butler by the face. But before he can act, the guard is zapped by a powerful bolt of electricity, his entire body convulsing as Lunaria stands calmly nearby with Kyle. The guard collapses to the ground, unconscious, leaving Rufemia and Nevia speechless. A faint crackle of electricity dances on Lunaria's fingertips as she watches them with a cold gaze. Kyle apologizes for being a hindrance, but Lunaria simply tells him she appreciates his concern. Her loyal maids watch in awe, exclaiming, "That's Lady Lunaria for you." Nevia and Rufemia are outraged, demanding to know how she dares to use offensive magic against a person. Lunaria turns the accusation back on them, asking if it's truly outrageous to protect a subordinate from a bloodthirsty beast and pointing out that Rufemia was the one who set the beast loose in the first place. Rufemia can only seethe in silent rage, shocked that Lunaria would dare to speak to her in such a way. Lunaria simply offers a smug, knowing smile. She thinks to herself that this must all be very puzzling for her stepmother, as the once silent and enduring Lunaria has suddenly rebelled out of nowhere. They haven't grasped the situation yet, thinking this is a simple coup when in reality, The power has always been on her side. Seeing her guards hesitating, Euphemia screeches at them to stop staring and beat the little girl to a pulp. Her guards charge forward with their weapons raised as Lunaria calmly floats into the air. She decides she should have made herself clearer earlier and says that if they're so willing to fight, she'll just reduce the output of her magic so they won't be knocked out instantly. With a resounding boom, she unleashes a wave of electricity that strikes down all of the guards at once. This new technique combines Lunaria's innate magic skills and martial arts knowledge, creating a palm strike charged with thunder magic. The attack sends intense, contracting pain through the victims' bodies, making it difficult for them to breathe. This agonizing torture without the mercy of unconsciousness is a living hell, designed to incapacitate, not kill. Lunaria smirks, her hands still crackling with energy, as she thinks that depending on how it's used, magic can be the best torture device. The remaining enemy servants can only scream in terror as their comrades fall around them. She turns to her stepmother with a chilling smile, mockingly repeating her earlier words, "I would never order them to harm my precious family, you say?" Euphemia is stunned into silence, realizing Lunaria won't let her get away with this and that there's no one she can tattle to, because Lunaria is now the head of the house. Lunaria declares that she is the one and only head of the family, the current Duchess of Sulfish. Euphemia's rage finally boils over as she demands to know what right Lunaria has to call herself a duchess. She screams that Lunaria is a fake, a lying piece of filth who should know her place. As she continues her tirade, Lunaria begins to chuckle darkly as a ball of crackling energy forms in her hand. With a confident smirk, she asks, "Me, a fake? Whatever could you mean? I have the mark of proof right here." She holds up the back of her hand, revealing the glowing scarlet rose crest, the holy stigmata that only appears on the true head of the family. Nevia suddenly gasps with delight and declares that she has won as well. She proudly presents the back of her own hand, which also bears a scarlet rose crest, though it's clearly a tattoo. Euphemia joins in, laughing triumphantly and confirming that of course her dear daughter has won too. Lunaria remains unfazed and begins to gather a glowing ball of light between her hands. Euphemia and Nevia watch in confusion, wondering what she's doing now. With a sly smile, Lunaria explains that she's just casting a perfect heal spell on Nevia. They both look at her, confused by the term perfect heal. She elaborates that unlike regular healing magic, this spell can even remove scars, and of course, tattoos are included as well. Nevia looks down at the mark on her hand in horror as the healing light envelopes it. Lunaria puts on a show of mock concern, telling Nevia she believes her crest is real and just wants to prove it to everyone, asking for her hand so she can help. With a sweet but menacing smile, she assures Nevia she's not doubting her in the least. "Come on, give me your hand," she insists, her eyes glinting with malice. Nevia recoils in terror while Euphemia shouts, "What is the point of such a mark?" Euphemia laughs hysterically, mocking Lunaria for thinking a single crest could make her the head of the family. She cackles that it's just what you'd expect from a naive little girl. She then gloats that the adult world is all about paperwork, and more paperwork. She reveals that all legal authority is in the hands of her husband, Theodore von Sulfish, Lunaria's own father. She explains that according to the law, the moment the late Duchess died, control of the Sulfish family fell to her husband. She triumphantly asks who Lunaria thinks Theodore, who is head over heels for her, would choose as the head of the family, declaring that the house is now theirs. As Euphemia laughs maniacally, Lunaria begins to laugh as well. Euphemia stops, demanding to know what's so funny. Lunaria explains that the adult world is indeed filled with endless procedures and paperwork, all of which her lazy father was incapable of handling himself. The experienced servants of the Sulfish family organized all the documents, and the final processing was handled by the family members, including herself. Euphemia retorts that such things are naturally handled by servants. Lunaria asks if her lazy father would have been capable of doing it himself, a question that leaves Euphemia speechless. With a sharp, knowing smile, she asks her stepmother, "Do you understand what that means?" She stands before the two stunned women and declares that they have no connection to the Sulfish Duke family. While Euphemia is indeed her father's second wife, neither she nor Nevia are recognized as legitimate members of the Sulfish family, and that's because she personally handled the paperwork to ensure it was so. She produces a document and points to a specific clause, stating that it's clearly written that they aren't even listed as part of the house, let alone in a position to take it over. She hands the document to Euphemia, informing her that a copy has already been submitted to the House of Lords, so she's free to read it as much as she likes. Euphemia and Nevia stare at the paper, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The new Lunaria reflects on the original Lunaria's quiet suffering, how she endured everything in the hopes that her family would one day return to normal. But the two women before her were never part of the family she wished for, so when her father instructed her to handle the procedures for their inclusion, she simply didn't do it, as he was not the one who invited them, but her. Instead of registering them, she carefully dealt with the paperwork so that they were never included in the family register, and her father was listed as only the acting head, leaving the formal position vacant for her to claim. She lets out a quiet, satisfied laugh, thinking that from the very beginning, the original Lunaria held all the cards. She smirks at her stunned enemies and asks if they finally figured it out. There have been blades at their necks since the moment they arrived in this house. They can only stare back in utter disbelief and terror. She thinks to herself that the original Lunaria never used those blades to cut them down. Instead, in a choice that was both strong and tragically fragile, she held the blade to her own throat. With a final, chilling thought, she promises the spirit of the girl she now embodies. If it was me, Lunaria, I would never forgive these guys. The enemy servants begin to panic, realizing that if they aren't part of the family, they won't be getting paid. Lunaria turns to them with a bright, cheerful smile and confirms their fears. They won't be getting a single coin. They erupt in outrage, demanding to know what she means and how she plans to pay for their services. Rufemia desperately screams that she is the Duke's wife and that her husband Theodore will provide for them. Lunaria calmly reminds her that, as she has said many times, she is the official head of the Solfege family, and her father no longer has the right to manage its assets. With a look of mock pity, she tells them they'll have to give up on their salaries and their careers as servants of the Solfege family. The enemy servants can only look on in utter shock and despair as their world comes crashing down around them. Rufemia is surrounded by her furious servants who are demanding their unpaid wages. Lunaria calmly places her hands together and announces that it is time for them to leave. She clarifies that she's not just talking about the annex, but the entire Solfege estate, and in the name of the head of the family, she orders them to leave immediately. With cold finality she declares, "You are all hereby banished from the Solfege family." Rufemia stares in disbelief, stammering Lunaria's name and asking if she's serious. She and Nevia fall to the floor, dramatically crying out and accusing her of having no mercy or compassion. Lunaria turns her back on them, questioning their sudden plea for the very things they never showed her. She reminds them with a chilling smile that she hopes they haven't forgotten everything they've done to her all this time. Rufemia flinches as Nevia lets out a small cry of fear. Lunaria taps her chin thoughtfully, pretending to recall the proper etiquette for such a situation. She remembers, "Oh yeah, that's right." A dark and vengeful expression crosses her face. She looks down on them with utter contempt, her eyes filled with cold fury. The enemy servants begin to panic again, demanding to know what she's going to do about their pay. Rufemia screams for her promised money and her reward for her services. Lunaria feigns surprise and says, "Oh my." Rufemia then completely loses her composure and shrieks, "I don't have any money." Her own servants are shocked by her blunt admission. Desperate to save herself, Rufemia points at them and declares that they were all fooled by Lunaria's scheme and are all just innocent victims. Lunaria dryly comments on her stepmother's impressive way with words. Rufemia, now completely unhinged, screams for her servants to hurry up and beat Lunaria to death, claiming that if she's the official head, killing her will solve all their problems. Her servants, however, hesitate, looking at their incapacitated comrades and muttering that it's easy for her to say, "Kill her." One of the servants decides to leave, but Lunaria's voice cuts through the chaos, threateningly asking what will happen if he does and if he thinks he can find another job safely. He demands to know what she means by that. He is utterly shocked by her implication. Rufemia, seeing her authority crumble, screams that there's no way out and that she'll chase down and ruin anyone who tries to escape, vowing to drag them all to hell with her. Her threats only serve to terrify her own servants even more. She then tries to rally them one last time, yelling that it'll be an easy job if they all just gang up on the little girl. Lunaria finally speaks up, mockingly asking her stepmother if she's kidding and if she really thinks she can solve this with brute force, even after witnessing her magic firsthand. One of the servants lets out a terrified scream. Lunaria looks down on them with utter disdain, stating that they must be idiots not to see the clear difference in power here. With a snap of her fingers, she unleashes another wave of electrical magic that zaps all of the remaining enemy servants. Rufemia and Nevia can only watch in horror, letting out a choked gasp. With a wicked grin, Lunaria tells them to entertain her more with their circus show, remarking that a recurring act is a comedy basic. One of the servants, still conscious, curses at her. He lunges forward, yelling at her to shut her mouth. Lunaria calmly remarks, "Oh my." Before he can reach her, she effortlessly conjures a sphere of water around his head, causing him to flail about as he's drowned in midair. As he struggles for air, she casually says she thinks she remembers his hideous face. She leans in close to the water sphere and asks him what he served her last time, before answering for him, "Oh yeah, you served me muddy water instead of tea." She asks him if it was some kind of amusing game for him back then. A flashback shows the same servant and his cronies pinning a younger Lunaria to a table, forcing her to drink the disgusting tea. She recalls how they all laughed and mocked her as she coughed and spat the muddy water onto the floor. The other servants who participated in that cruel joke now look on in terror. Lunaria then says that this punishment is for all of them who reacted just now, a jolt of fear running through them as they realize their past actions have come back to haunt them. Instantly, spheres of water materialize around all of their heads, drowning them simultaneously. She reminds them of the words they used to mock her, "You shouldn't waste tea, my lady," and how they told her to drink it all. With a terrifyingly sweet smile, she tells them, "So you better not waste it, drink it all, okay?" They all cough and choke, trapped in their watery prisons. Lunaria watches their panic struggles with a cold, satisfied expression, commenting on how hilarious it is to see them all panic now that they realize they were the ones trapped in the caged lion's den all along. One of them manages to gurgle out, "Forgive me." She simply scoffs in response. She then releases them from the water spheres, and they all collapse to the ground, gasping for air. They writhe in agony on the floor, still suffering from the effects of her magic. They all cry out in pain and terror. Lunaria looks down at the sea of collapsed bodies and feigns surprise, remarking that it seems all of her stepmother's underlings have collapsed. With a sinister smile, she sarcastically wonders if someone might have tripped them. Rufemia and Nevia can only stare in absolute horror at the display of power. Lunaria turns her attention back to them, her eyes glowing with menace as she says, "Now, let's see." She focuses on Rufemia first. Then her gaze shifts to the terrified Nevia. With a cold, calculating look, she asks them if they were planning on killing her, and if that means she now has to fight them to protect herself. Her power crackles around her as she prepares for the final confrontation. Rufemia and Nevia are paralyzed with fear, whispering for someone to help them. Nevia, in a desperate attempt to save herself, screams that it's not her fault and that her mother forced her to do everything. Rufemia furiously denies it, shouting that she would never force her own daughter to do anything. Nevia shrieks that her mother is a liar who only ever thinks about herself and that she was indeed forced to participate in the abuse. Rufemia screams back, accusing her daughter of having convenient amnesia and reminding her that she was the one who was most excited when tormenting Lunaria. The two of them descend into a screaming match, with Rufemia calling Nevia a stupid little girl just like Lunaria. Lunaria watches their pathetic display with utter boredom, telling them they're just wasting her time. The scarlet rose crest on her hand begins to shine brightly. Nevia, in a fit of rage, screams, "This shitty old hag," and lunges at her mother. Suddenly, she looks at her hand in confusion, wondering why it's covered in her mother's hair. Rufemia screams in agony, asking what Nevia did to her as her hair begins to rapidly fall out. Nevia panics, swearing she didn't do anything. Rufemia's face begins to contort and decay, her skin wrinkling and her features twisting into a grotesque mask of old age as she demands to know what's happening to her. She lets out a blood-curdling scream as she collapses to the floor. Her hands become gnarled and withered, and she looks at them in horror, crying out in pain. Her teeth begin to rot and fall out as she screams that her skin feels like it's being burnt alive. Rufemia and Nevia writhe on the floor in agony, their bodies rapidly aging and decaying as they scream for help. They are left as withered, decrepit husks of their former selves, still begging for somebody to help them. Lunaria looks down at the two of them and calmly remarks that they're having a rather ridiculous way of talking in their sleep. Kyle, witnessing the horrific scene, asks her what exactly is going on. She explains that she cast an illusionary mist, a form of dark magic. He asks if she overdid it, but she reassures him that this is more than enough punishment. He looks at the two women, who seem very excited in their shared nightmare, and agrees that they certainly look like they needed some sleep. Lunaria decides to just let them be, as they'll eventually come to their senses on their own. She explains that they are now trapped in the same dream, a dream so sweet it will make their eyes roll back. She looks down at them one last time. With a cold, final thought, she tells them to savor the nightmare she has created for them, a nightmare that mirrors the one the original Lunaria was forced to live every single day. Now that Rufemia and Nevia have been dealt with, she contemplates who her next target should be. Kyle interrupts her thoughts, calling out her name. He gestures to the unconscious bodies of the enemy servants littered across the floor and asks what she wants to do with them. She instructs him and her other loyal servants to drag the bodies out of the room. As they begin to clean up the mess, she gets a strange feeling of déjà vu, like she's experienced this exact scene before. Suddenly, the familiar ding of a choice window chimes again, startling her. The sound echoes through the now quiet room. Annoyed by the interruption, she wonders what it could be this time. Two options appear before her: let him in, or don't let him in. The window explains that her brother will be arriving at the annex soon, forcing her to make a decision about his entry. She grits her teeth, realizing her brother is the next opponent she must face. Elsewhere, her brother walks through the estate's garden, wondering if his sister is serious about ringing the magic bell. He scoffs at her lack of modesty, complaining that she's a drag who definitely inherited their mother's troublesome blood. Combing his hair with a smug look, he decides he needs to go talk some sense into his foolish little sister. A dark, ominous shot of Lunaria's silhouette, her dress still dripping from the water magic she used. A flashback begins, showing her drenched and calling out to her brother as he walks away down a long hallway. He turns to her with a cold expression as she reminds him that he's her one and only sibling. She recalls the memories of the kind older brother she once knew, the one who was like a knight watching over his little princess. But as they grew up, they drifted apart, and she began to hear rumors of his delinquency more and more frequently. At least, that's what the original Lunaria chose to believe, clinging to the memory of his past kindness. The flashback continues to a time when he found her completely drenched in the hallway and asked what happened. She tried to explain that her stepmother had just shoved her, but Nevia suddenly appeared and playfully tackled him from behind, shouting, "Gotcha!" His cold demeanor instantly melted as he laughed and greeted Nevia with affection. Nevia then turned to Lunaria with a sickly sweet smile, feigning concern and guessing that her dear sister-in-law must have tripped on a bucket and fallen again. Lunaria looked on in shock as Nevia played the victim, crying out, "No way! Are you saying it was all my fault?" She tried to protest that Nevia was lying and that the servants she ordered were the ones who did it. Nevia immediately put on a show of tears, crying to her brother about how terrible it was and how much her dear sister-in-law must hate her. With tears streaming down her face, she declared that she didn't want to stay in the house anymore, and her brother, completely fooled, turned to Lunaria and told her that was enough. He then coldly looked down at his own sister and ordered her to apologize to Nevia. He accused her of always insisting she was right and reminded her that the world doesn't revolve around her. He then lectured her about caring for Nevia, who was still unfamiliar with the house and feeling overwhelmed. Lunaria tried to protest that she wasn't the one at fault, but he simply cut her off, telling her to get a hold of herself. He dismissed her feelings, saying he understood she was depressed after their mother's passing but that it was time for her to move on, just like he and their father did. Nevia then interrupted, asking him to forgive her dear sister-in-law, and suggesting he show her how to hunt to cheer her up. He readily agreed, and the two of them walked away arm in arm, laughing together, leaving Lunaria standing alone and abandoned in the hallway. Her hair, still dripping wet, symbolized her silent tears of betrayal and sorrow. Back in the present, the choice window about her brother still hangs in the air. She remembers her brother, Randolph Unselfish, her only blood-related sibling. In the game, his relationship with Nevia was portrayed differently, but from her own inherited memories, she knows he was a lecherous man who turned a blind eye to the bullying she endured, despite already having a fiancé. She is suddenly snapped out of her thoughts as she realizes the choice window is floating right above her head in a room full of people. She looks around but no one else seems to notice it, as if time has stopped for everyone but her. She watches her servants frozen in the act of dragging away the unconscious bodies. She looks around the room, confirming that time has indeed stopped for everyone except her. She finds it both surprising and incredibly convenient that time pauses whenever she has to make a choice. She also reflects on how surprisingly easy it is for her to use magic, as if she's been doing it for ages, a fact she attributes to the memories of the original Lunaria residing within her body. She decides to save her surprise for later and focuses on the choice at hand: what to do about her brother. The two options glow before her: let him in, or don't let him in. She knows that the original Lunaria would have surely chosen not to let him in. Inviting him in would lead to a decisive confrontation, something the kind and family-oriented Lunaria would have desperately wanted to avoid. She looks at the portrait of her mother, realizing that the people of this house took advantage of Lunaria's gentle nature. Addressing the portrait, she says that while her mother seems like a great person, she unfortunately failed in raising her son. She wonders if he is still the sweet and lovely son her mother remembers, but she knows that if that were the case, she wouldn't be hesitating right now. Her eyes narrow with a cold, determined glint. She decisively chooses the second option, Don't let him in. I'm not stopping, she declares to herself as time resumes. There are no pauses. With a swirl of her hand, she uses her wind magic to slam the large double doors of the annex shut with a resounding him. Her loyal servants are startled by the sudden noise, looking up in confusion. She thinks to herself that her decision is now cemented, once again wishing she could save before making such important choices. Kyle asks her what that was just now, a hint of concern in his voice. She dismisses it as nothing and tells him to continue with his duties as usual, which he acknowledges with a bow. She then remembers one last thing and calls out his name. She orders him to move the two withered women out of the room. She also instructs him to take down the portrait of her late mother. He asks what she wants him to do with the portrait. She tells him to move it to the main building's library for safekeeping. He questions her timing, noting that it has just started to rain outside, but she insists, telling him to wrap it carefully so it doesn't get damaged. As she watches her servants carry the precious portrait out into the rain, she looks out the window. The rain begins to pour down, slamming against the glass. She smirks, thinking to herself, rain suitable for some revenge, huh? Her brother, Randolph, is caught in the sudden downpour as he makes his way to the annex, complaining about his bad luck. He grumbles about the rain ruining his perfectly styled hair and curses his sister, calling her nothing but a disaster. As he runs through the rain, Lunaria watches from the window, thinking of her mother and how she has nothing against her. With a cold, determined look in her eyes, she apologizes to her deceased mother, because she is about to utterly destroy her son. The rain continues to patter against the window as she watches her brother approach, knowing he's about to arrive. Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning strikes the ground right in front of the annex with a deafening boom. It's time for round 2, she thinks to herself, her face illuminated by the flash. Another bolt of lightning crashes down, and the doors to the annex are blown open. Her brother Randolph stumbles in, drenched and disheveled, shouting, "Is Lunaria here?" He looks around the empty entrance hall, calling out her name and asking where she is. He groans in frustration, completely unaware that his stepsister Nevia is lying on the floor nearby in her withered state. She weakly calls out to him, and he turns to see her and his mother-in-law on the floor. He rushes to their side, demanding to know what happened and crying out their names as Nevia begs him not to look at her, saying she looks like a wrinkled mummy. He tries to comfort her, telling her she's talking nonsense and that she still looks like his cute little sister-in-law. He gently lifts her chin to look at her face, and she begins to laugh hysterically. From the top of the stairs, Lunaria watches the scene with a cold, amused expression, remarking on their beautiful brotherly love and admitting she's struggling to hold back her own laughter. Randolph looks up at his sister, his face a mixture of anger and confusion as he calls her name. She stands elegantly at the top of the stairs and greets him with a polite, "Good day, brother." Then, with a devastatingly sweet smile, she adds, "And this is also going to be goodbye." He flies into a rage, demanding to know what she's done to Nevia and what she plans to do now that she's rung the magic bell. She calmly explains that she has decided to become the head of the Solfege family, adding with a smirk that her announcement seemed to take the other two by surprise. He clutches his head in frustration, muttering that he never imagined she, of all people, would want to be the head of the family. He then tries to assert his authority, telling her to listen and that she is not the head of the family. He proudly declares that he, Randolph on Solfege, will be the rightful head. He claims it's what their father intends, arguing that while their mother did well for a woman, the position was originally a man's duty. He looks down on her with disdain, calling her an ignoramus who hasn't even graduated from school and telling her she needs a reality check. She simply replies, "Oh, you say the funniest things." He scoffs, calling her ambitions a joke and questioning if she really thinks she's fit to be the next head of the family. She calmly explains that he is currently the center of a scandal rocking the social scene, a disgraceful abomination unbecoming of a Solfege, so much so that no one would be surprised if the king himself ordered him to step down. Her eyes glint with malice as she spells it out for him. Lord Randolph is participating in an illicit affair with his own sister-in-law, despite being engaged to a fiancé. He can only stammer, "What could you possibly mean?" He glances back at the withered form of Nevia, his bravado finally cracking. With a triumphant, teary smile, Lunaria throws his own words back at him, asking if it's not he who is blind to reality. She stands tall at the top of the stairs and mockingly says, "Now that's some brotherly love you got there." He can only stare up at her, completely taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. With a twisted, gleeful expression, he asks her when she started talking with such impertinence. A shot of him winking, holding a rose, a picture of false charm and confidence. She stands at the top of the stairs, looking down at him and repeating his word, Impertinent? She asks him, "Who are you calling impertinent?" as his creepy, smiling face fills the panel. She then bursts into a fit of genuine, unrestrained laughter. He asks her what's so funny, his composure beginning to crumble. She apologizes, wiping a tear from her eye, and says it's just that he's saying such weird things. She asks if it's truly impertinent of her to be considerate enough to try and prevent her dear older brother from suffering humiliation. She then reveals the devastating truth. If he were to become the head of the Solfege family, he would surely become the laughingstock of the entire kingdom. She thinks to herself that this man not only betrayed his own sister but also tarnished the very family name she tried so desperately to protect for their late mother. A flashback shows him declaring his love for his fiancée with a straight face, while behind the scenes he was entangled with Nevia day and night. He turned a blind eye to the abuse his own sister suffered at the hands of his lover. While Lunaria was desperately trying to endure and protect the household their mother left behind, he didn't even try to restrain his own carnal desires. She tells him that the price and consequences for his actions will be paid right here and now, even if he dismisses the accusations as shameless rumors. She looks down at the still whimpering Nevia and tells her it's her unlucky day, but for the sake of appearances, she'll allow her to continue her performance on stage. She then reminds her brother that he chose to have an affair with his sister-in-law while being engaged to a noble young lady from a distinguished family. Isn't that right, Nevia? She knows that if the rumors are true, his engagement will be broken and his noble title will be in jeopardy. He looks down, feigning disappointment, and says it's too bad he has to hear such a story from his own family member. He then explodes in a burst of fake anger, declaring that the rumor is completely false. Her expression remains unchanged, a silent challenge. He demands to know what proof she has to support such nonsense, claiming it's so ridiculous he doesn't even feel like getting angry. He then desperately tries to explain his relationship with Nevia, claiming he loves her as a brother and asking if that's really a crime. Nevia eagerly chimes in, agreeing that they're just as close as siblings. He looks up at Lunaria and says he finally understands. With a smug, condescending smile, he accuses her of being jealous of Nevia. He calls her a hopeless little sister, assuming she rang the magic bell just to get his attention because she thought Nevia would take him away from her. With a creepy, leering expression, he offers to forgive her if she sincerely apologizes. She thinks to herself that this is the true nature of Randolph von Solfege, and that if she tries to deal with him seriously, she'll just get caught up in his twisted logic. He was one of the main culprits who cornered the original Lunaria, and now it's time for him to pay. With a gentle, patient smile, she asks him if the act is over now. She says she was listening up until the halfway point and asks if, in short, he just wants to prove his innocence. She then lets out a delicate yawn and apologizes, saying she got a little bored. With a sharp, knowing look, she says that of course, she also wishes to believe what he says. But then her expression hardens as she reveals there are many witnesses to prove his infidelity, and his face falls as he realizes his lies won't work this time. She stands before him with her loyal servants, a silent testament to the truth she is about to reveal. She explains that when he was seen getting cozy with Nevia, his audible echoes of distress were heard by more than one servant throughout the hallway. And that's not all. Another servant found Nevia's hairpin in his bedroom, and another smelled her lingering perfume on his sheets while cleaning. With a wide, triumphant grin, she tells him the testimonies just keep pouring in, one after another. She mockingly asks if they've both been rather careless, haven't they? He can only stare back in stunned silence, his affair completely exposed. She asks him if he still thinks it's possible to talk his way out of this. She looks down on him with a mixture of pity and contempt, calling him brother, in a drawn-out, mocking tone and saying that this is all so sad. He finally snaps, screaming that he feels bad for her. He accuses her of conspiring with the servants to fabricate such unbelievable lies. He demands to know what she used to bribe them with, money or status. He then tries to regain some semblance of control, acknowledging that she's serious about becoming the head of the family and commending her initiative. However, he calls her careless, arguing that using only their household servants as witnesses will just make it look like a trivial family squabble to the public. He leans in, his voice dripping with condescension, and asks what she'll do when he seriously pleads for his innocence, confident that the public and his devoted fiancée will trust him over a naive little girl like her. He gets right in her face, hissing that she's the one in trouble now. She looks at him, completely unfazed, and asks, "But your fiancé shares the same opinion as I do, dear brother?" She then turns and calls for Kyle to bring that out. Randolph demands to know what she means by that. Kyle bows and says, "As you wish." He presents a small, ornate box to Randolph, who looks at it in confusion. Kyle opens the box to reveal a glowing, crystal-like object inside. Lunaria asks him if he remembers it, reminding him of a time when they were young and used to play with it together. He stares at the object, his eyes widening in recognition as he realizes it's a recording device. She smiles sweetly and reminisces about their childhood, how they would engage in idle chatter and childish plays, and how they even recorded themselves singing and playing the cello on this very stone to show their mother. She looks down with a hint of sadness and says she never wanted to use this beautiful memory for something like this, but he's left her no choice. From the recording device, a woman's voice, full of despair, says, "I don't know what to do anymore." Randolph gasps in shock, recognizing the voice and asking, "Mary Lane?" Lunaria confirms that it is indeed the sorrowful voice of his one and only fiancée, Miss Mary Lane von Prowen, the daughter of the Marquis of Prowen. Randolph is horrified, asking what she did and denying that he ever spoke to her. The recording continues with Marilane's voice, revealing that Lord Randolph is involved in an unusual relationship with his stepsister, Miss Nevia. Lunaria simply comments, "Oh my, how scandalous." She explains that just as she was about to disclose his infidelity, his fiancé, whom she had only met a few times, suddenly paid her a visit. A flashback shows Mary Lane confessing everything to Lunaria, revealing that she knew about the affair and didn't know what to do anymore, and that the clever Lunaria didn't forget to record their conversation. It seems Mary Lane simply wanted someone to confide in, and without any prompting, she spat out everything she knew about Randolph in one breath before quickly and awkwardly leaving. It's revealed that the original Lunaria actually didn't want to undermine her brother. She had recorded their childhood memories on the stone, hoping it might one day come in handy to convince him to be the kind brother she once knew, and that perhaps one day they could laugh together again. It was a foolish hope, but in the narrow, dark world she was trapped in, it was the only thing she had left to cling to. But the someday she desperately hoped for never arrived. The recording of Marilane's heartbroken confession echoes through the grand hall as Lunaria holds the glowing stone. Marilane's voice sniffs and hiccups with sorrow. Randolph, feigning a calm he doesn't feel, dismisses it as a farce and asks his sister to stop. He reflects on how long it's been since his kind and dear brother, Persona, disappeared. With a creepy, twisted smile, he declares that the pitiful end of what he once was is here and demands that she hand over the annoying stone. Lunaria simply tells him to be quiet. Her eyes glint with a dark amusement as she announces that the climax of the show is about to begin. He scoffs, telling her to stop bluffing. But the recording continues, with Mary Lane confirming that Randolph has been cheating on her for quite some time. Randolph, still trying to maintain his composure, calls it deplorable and wonders who could have filled her head with such ridiculous nonsense. The recording then reveals the devastating truth. The one who told Mary Lane about the affair was none other than Miss Nevia herself, who boasted about her scandalous relationship with Lord Randolph. Both Randolph and Nevia are completely stunned by this revelation. Lunaria chuckles, commenting that the voice they're hearing now is her own from the recording, asking if it's true that Nevia said such a thing. The recording continues with Lunaria explaining that while Nevia didn't say it directly, it was almost as if she did. Marilane's voice then chimes in, angrily stating that with such blatant hints, anyone would have guessed what was going on. Randolph stammers, "Blatant hints?" Marilane's recorded voice confirms that she wasn't just assuming things. She reveals that Nevia's attire frequently matched Randolph's, she would mimic his catchphrases. And she would constantly show off earrings that were a gift from him. She even had the audacity to comment on his girlish tastes, blatantly exposing their affair to anyone who was paying attention. And that wasn't the end of it. Mary Lane explains that Nevia once gave her a ceramic plate as a souvenir from a trip, but she was shocked to discover it was an art piece from the same place Randolph had visited on official business around that time. The recording ends with Mary Lane wondering what the hell Nevia was doing there of all places. She then recounts the story of the ball where Nevia approached her while she was resting. Nevia had spewed the most sickening words straight to her face. She had mockingly asked if Mary Lane was tired, commenting that being a spoiled, delicate flower must be exhausting. She then told her that if she was going to marry her brother-in-law, she'd better start building up her stamina. With a lewd, triumphant smile, she had whispered, "Brother-in-law likes it rough, you know?" To top it all off, she said all this while shamelessly showing off a disgusting hickey on her neck. The recording ends with Marilane's voice, full of humiliation and frustration, and Kyle clears his throat, stopping the playback. Lunaria smiles and says, "Well then." With a wicked glint in her eye, she looks between her brother and Nevia and declares that it seems the two of them need to have a little discussion. Randolph screams that Mary Lane is lying. He frantically denies everything, claiming it's all a conspiracy to frame him. He points a finger at his sister and shouts, "Shame on you, Lunaria." I won't succumb to such despicable tactics. Lunaria simply looks at him with a cold, knowing expression, remarking that he's determined to see this through to the end, just as she expected. He continues to rant, calling the evidence fabricated and baseless lies and saying he can't believe she would drag Mary Lane into this. He turns to Nevia for support, claiming it's not true at all. Nevia, still in her withered form, weakly agrees with him. Lunaria then turns her attention to Nevia and asks if she's truly okay. Nevia is taken aback, with her brother's claims that she's nothing more than his stepsister. Lunaria leans in and whispers that if it were her, she couldn't possibly forgive something like that. She tells Nevia that she thought she was the one manipulating her brother all this time, but it seems it was the exact opposite. Nevia is stunned into silence, realizing the truth in her words. Lunaria looks down at her with a pitying smile and says, "That's right, you stupid ass, and you got played." A final flashback shows Randolph comforting Nevia, telling her to get herself together and not to listen to his sister's ridiculous point of view. He orders Lunaria to apologize to Nevia, his voice cold and commanding. Her expression hardens as she looks at him with utter contempt. As thunder rumbles outside, she thinks to herself that she was the one who was being deceived all this time. She stands over the two of them, the true master of the situation. She tells Nevia that she's right, and that she approached her brother in order to take over the Solfege family. But as expected, her brother was one step ahead of her, and thus she found herself in the palm of his hand. Randolph screams that her conclusion is ridiculous and that this is all utter rubbish. He denies ever manipulating Nevia and questions the idea that she wanted to take over the family. Lunaria simply smiles and says that surely someone as clever as him would have figured it out, that Nevia and the others were scheming something. But it didn't matter to him, because he was just planning to play around with Nevia before throwing her away. She then turns to Nevia and asks if her brother didn't whisper sweet nothings into her ear. With a terrifying smile, she imitates her brother's voice. "You're the one I truly love, and, eventually, I'll break my engagement with Mary Lane." Nevia looks up in horror, realizing how easily she was fooled by his empty promises. A memory of him holding her and telling her she was the one he truly loved flashes through her mind. Lunaria remarks that it's a classic case of a small fish becoming food for a big fish. Randolph screams that it's all utter bullshit and a woman's delusion. Lunaria cuts him off, asking if this is what he heard from one of his friends, noting that he gets much more talkative when he's with them. She reveals that the day after her conversation with Mary Lane, she personally investigated her brother's actions. It was an action born from a desperate desire to believe in his innocence, but it seems some rough tactics were required to uncover the truth. He screams that it's all just a fabrication. He asks if they're going to have to listen to that nonsensical recording device again, claiming that no matter whose voice she uses, it doesn't matter. He then makes a fatal mistake, yelling that they must have been bribed to say that, and that it's appalling she would involve the regulars at the tavern after Mary Lane. Lunaria catches his slip-up and asks why he mentioned the regulars at the tavern when she only said she heard it from one of his friends. She then turns to Nevia and reveals that her brother talks about her whenever he gets drunk at the bar, and he also said this. Randolph screams at her to cut it out. He accuses her of spouting false stories and points to the withered Nevia, claiming she's troubled by her lies. He desperately asks Nevia for her support. Lunaria decides to stop her verbal assault for now. Nevia, however, has reached her breaking point and asks, "What the hell?" She looks up at Randolph and asks what he just said, and Lunaria explains that she couldn't bear to say it herself, so she'll just leave it at that. Randolph tries to backtrack, telling Nevia to forget it, but she's not having it. She demands that he just say it, and Lunaria agrees that if she insists, she'll tell her. She then kneels down and answers a question for Nevia first. She asks Nevia if she has more tattoos than just the rose on her hand, specifically a tattoo of her deceased dog that she drew herself, in a place where only gentlemen are permitted to see. Nevia is horrified that she knows about this, realizing that nobody else should know about that. A flashback begins with Lunaria recalling how her brother spoke about his lover Nevia in front of his friends. A flustered Randolph tries to silence her, yelling about what she thinks she's talking about. Lunaria continues her story, her eyes cold as she brings up the subject of a dog tattoo. The scene shifts to Randolph in a tavern, drunkenly complaining that the dog tattoo on Nevia's back has an extremely ugly face. He describes it in crude detail, saying its cheeks hang so low they fill the entire canvas of her back, making it barely recognizable as a face. He laughs with his friends, joking that it feels like he's facing backwards even when he's facing her head-on. His friends laugh along as he adds that whenever he embraces her, it must be in absolute darkness, with one friend callously agreeing it's only natural with a tattoo like that. Randolph's face twists into a disturbing grin as he says whenever he catches a glimpse of that ugly dog. Back in the present, Lunaria finishes his sentence for him, confirming that's what he said. Randolph looks on in horror while Nevia is completely shocked by the revelation. An attendant clears his throat awkwardly as Lunaria turns to the heartbroken Nevia and asks her if she can still believe she was truly loved after hearing such cruel words. Nevia turns away from her brother in disgust, calling him the worst as he stammers, trying to deny it. Her composure shatters and she screams at him, reminding him that he promised he truly loved her while he was just making a fool of her behind her back. The confrontation descends into a chaotic argument as Nevia accuses him of toying with her heart while Randolph tries to deflect her anger. He callously accuses her of planning to use the Solfege family for her own benefit and trying to pin all the blame on him. Nevia is stunned, realizing that Randolph's earlier claims about Lunaria fabricating everything were true, and she quickly shifts the blame back to Lunaria. She furiously demands to know how Lunaria could have possibly known about her private tattoo, accusing her of being the one to leak the secret. Randolph eagerly latches onto this, pointing an accusatory finger at Nevia and yelling that she's right, no one else could have been the source of the leak. He completely loses his temper, screaming at Nevia to stop lying and calling her a whore, accusing her of flirting with guests and even the young servants of the mansion. Nevia snaps back with a crazed smile, retorting that plenty of other men must have seen the stupid dog tattoo anyway. Randolph is struck completely speechless by her admission. Lunaria calmly taps a glowing recording device, which begins to buzz and play back the audio of the argument. A recording of Randolph's voice fills the room, replaying his accusation that Nevia flirts with everyone in the mansion. Then, a recording of Nevia's horrified scream and her damning retort about plenty of other men seeing the tattoo echoes for all to hear. With a triumphant smile, Lunaria declares that this is checkmate. She turns to a stunned Nevia and thanks her for the cooperation. Nevia realizes with horror that Lunaria now has undeniable proof of a scandalous affair between her and Randolph. Lunaria holds up the small recording device, taunting her brother by asking what he thinks of her surprisingly useful little toy. Randolph stares in abject terror at the evidence in her hand. Nevia stumbles backward, her face pale with fear. She looks down, utterly defeated by Lunaria's scheme. Randolph's face is a mask of panic while Lunaria's eyes burn with a cold, triumphant fire. He finally gives up, admitting defeat but pleading with her that she can't possibly be serious. He makes a desperate appeal to their family ties, reminding her they're blood siblings who should be helping each other out. He then lunges forward, trying to snatch the recording device away from her with a stomp of his foot. He lets out a nervous, desperate laugh. Lunaria gives him a chilling smile and questions his sudden desire to be under the same roof. She gestures toward the gloomy annex building behind them and tells him to take a good look, reminding him that he and their father banished her there while giving her former room to Nevia. She glares at him with contempt, stating that it was he and their father who forced this miserable situation upon her. With a grand, sweeping gesture, she explains that the annex was originally built for their great-grandmother to recuperate. But she reveals the dark truth that recuperation was just a lie, and the building was actually a prison designed to confine their frail grandmother and keep her away from power.